Talk about our third and final progressive president today, and that's Woodrow Wilson. Remember, he's still there in imperialism. He's still there in World War I. But we're going to talk about some main things he did, okay? Now, as we said, the election of 1912, we have three men running. The Republican Party is split between Roosevelt and Taft, and so that leaves the way for Wilson. Here's another example here, the mother of all presidents. Basically saying if you win Ohio, you win the presidency. In 1912, Ohio was split between Taft and Roosevelt, and so Woodrow Wilson will win. Basically, like math for you, if you will, Republican divided by 2 equals a Democrat win. Okay? Now, the man we get is Woodrow Wilson. Here he is. He is a different style of president. He's going to carry on the progressive trend, but he is also Democrat, which means he wants to help the people out a little bit more, protect from big business, etc. Liberal, if you will, and we'll get into that. Now, one of the things we have here is regulation. He's really going to bring regulation. Yes, Roosevelt did it, others have done it before, but Wilson brings a new, just absorbent amount of regulation. And so what is regulation? Regulation is where the federal government not only intervenes, but it sometimes also tells businesses what to do. And so this is the opposite of laissez-faire. Complete opposite of laissez-faire. All right? And so from this point going forward, Democrats are represented by the donkey, D's. Okay? Democrats will be liberal, and they will believe in regulating business. Our current president believes in regulating business and kind of giving them rules, whereas Republicans, they're kind of laissez-faire, hands-off, and so we'll get more into that later on, all right? So let's talk about what he did to regulate things. Well, he wanted to regulate a couple of things. Number one, he said business was still not fair, so he wants to make business fair. And number two, he wants to restore people's faith in the banks. So that's what we're going to do here. Now, this is a statue outside of the Federal Trade Commission in New York City. It is a man wrestling a horse, and this is interesting, isn't it? A wild horse has a spirit, and you have to tame that horse, right? You have to train it. So this is actually called man versus business. Business is the name of the horse, and we said we've let it go too long, and so we're going to regulate it, we're going to control it, we're going to rein it in, and that's what the Federal Trade Commission does. The Federal Trade Commission sets up fair trade practices. How many of y'all parents would love this? You know, you come in, that's not fair, life's not fair, get used to it. But the Federal Trade Commission is to stop this mentality in consumers, so they protect against things like big tariffs on other states or just any number of things, and so they're out to protect it and make things fair, all right? The next thing, as we said, and probably the biggest thing, has to do with currency, has to do with money. So he enacts means to start, a series of constructive aid acts to actually aid business, because if people are spending money, they're going to do this, okay? So the Currency Act is also known as the Glass-Owen Act. All I want you to have for the Glass-Owen Act, it had to do with money, and it's going to change the way we had money. The biggest thing it did is it set up the Federal Reserve System. This is the Federal Reserve System. Okay? The Federal Reserve System, 12 districts, and they each have a Federal Reserve Bank. Our district here for us would be St. Louis, and so the St. Louis is the Federal Reserve Bank. Okay? Now, what is the Federal Reserve Bank? Or the federal bank, or whatever it might be. It's like a super bank. Okay? I'm going to explain to you how this works. The Federal Reserve, not just the bank, but the Federal Reserve, go ahead and flip over a dollar bill if you have one, is on the back. They're the ones who control and make our money. So the Federal Reserve Act, or system, divided the country into 12 districts, but it also controls how much money comes out into circulation, how much money is available for us to get. Now, and the really most important thing out here is that it is independent of any branch of government. They're an independent organization, so the president's not over them, Congress, Supreme Court, nobody. They do this because they see it as good in their mind in a business sense. Now, they do have to tell Congress this is what we're about to do, so Congress can make their assumptions. Generally speaking, if an interest rate is high, you're going to see your income tax come down a little bit, but that's more about economics. But here we go nonetheless, okay? Now, when we control, how do we allow to control this money? It's called elastic money. Elastic means stretch further. And so the elasticity, $5 word there, right? Elasticity of money basically means do we have a lot of money or do we have a little money? And so they stretch it out, they give more things as it becomes necessary. Okay? So, here's how our Federal Reserve works. We have a Board of Governors. They're appointed by the President, confirmed by the Senate. We have a Federal Open Market Committee. 5 of the 12 reserve banks there. We have the reserve banks, 24 branches, etc. We have member banks, and then all these different things. And so you see how it's going, right? It's a lot of stuff in it. Now, elastic money, as I said, stretching your money, making it further, making it available in society. Now, there is something. When you go to buy a house or a car, and you go get that loan from Regions or whatever bank you go to, Regions doesn't give you that money. They don't have it. They call the Federal Reserve. In this case, they would call Federal Reserve out of St. Louis. And they would tell them, yes, we'll give you that money to give to them, but here's our discount rate. Now, the discount rate is the interest rate you need to earn on a given amount of money today to end up with a given amount of money in the future. That basically means that Federal Reserve wants that money back from that bank. But they have to do it with an interest, otherwise there's nothing in it for them, right? So they charge an interest rate to Regions, which they in turn charge to you in your mortgage. And so when you're paying back that mortgage, you're not only paying back Regions, you're paying back Regions so that Regions can pay back the Federal Reserve Bank. I know that seems a little confusing, but that's the discount rate, okay? It basically determines your APR, your monthly interest, all right? Now, the next thing, Wilson wants to go after the trust. See how he's emptying his buckets, right? We have tariff legislation. We'll get that in a second, I guess. We'll go ahead and add it. If you'll put the Underwood tariff here. The Underwood tariff was a tariff that came out by Mr. Wilson, and as the name denotes, under, you would think beneath something, right? It's a low tariff. The idea was competition. Let the businesses work. We're going to rein them in. So we've taken care of the tariffs. We've taken care of currency. Now we're going to take care of what? Antitrust. Now, we already have an antitrust, do we not? Called Sherman Anti. But the Sherman Antitrust failed in a couple of reasons. Number one, it didn't eliminate them all, remember, because Teddy kind of figured out what's good and bad in competition. And then lastly, it actually kind of said that unions could be involved in this. So Clayton Antitrust is to shore this up, okay? The Clayton Antitrust Act is to take on these monopolies, this iron horse, if you will. And so what happens here out of this? The Clayton Antitrust will eliminate all monopolies. Not just some, all. So who's the real trust buster here? Wilson, right? He eliminates all trust. And it is to restore competition. He wants competition because he says out of competition we get better prices, better products. Makes sense sometimes, right? Second thing, you can't use it against unions. So you can't use a Sherman Antitrust or an antitrust law against a union. They're workers. And so that's another very important thing there. The last thing we're going to get for this one here, Wilson comes in as well, and he has another form of diplomacy. That means we're dealing with foreign countries. His is actually called moral diplomacy, all right? And a moral is an ethic. It's something you stand by. In this case, Christianity. Wilson had been come from the family of preachers, and so his idea was to spread Christian principles to the other countries to get them to do that because he felt that was what was right. Remember, Teddy Roosevelt had that quote we looked at earlier on as well. And so that set us up for Wilson. The next thing we're going to talk about is women under Wilson and Teddy and Taft. And we're really going to look at the women's right to vote.